All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get people in and we're going to get started with our September teacher success webinar. So we're going to let people get in and get settled. You will be able to put questions and answers in our Q&A. If you locate the Q&A with the speech bubbles on your Zoom toolbar, you can put your questions there, and as we can at the end, we will be trying to take as many as we possibly can. So it is just the top of the hour, which means 12 o'clock here on the West Coast, where I am coming to this webinar from. And we're just going to give about another minute while people are coming in and watching who is joining us from the various places. So thank you for taking this time out of your schedule to join Caitlin and Alicia and myself. And I think we're holding steady right there. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, as you have questions, please use the Q&A, and you would be, as we can, we're going to go ahead and answer questions at the end. So for those of you that are joining in as new, hello, Loretta. I'm glad, Loretta, you're here, and everyone else. And Loretta's one of our new teachers, and she's been in lots of classes with me. So my name is Erin Gerard, and I am a member of our class quality team here on the platform. And my job is to support you, our teachers, whether you are brand new or you're a veteran teacher like Alicia and Caitlin. That's what we do with class qualities. We're here to support you, whether you want coaching, you need some extra support, you have questions that need to be answered, class quality is here to support you. And I really understand what it's like to be a teacher on the platform. I started my journey with Outschool 2.5 years ago as a parent. And if any of you are nervous about the technology, that was me. I waited 6 months while my girls were taking classes, and then I decided to take the plunge and become a teacher. And I went like, oh my goodness, this is a lot easier than I thought it was. So if you have nerves and apprehension, please know there are other veteran teachers that have been there with you. So I've been teaching on the site for 2 years, and then most recently, beginning of the summer, after contracting with Outschool, joined the company full-time. I'll still teach part-time because I think we have an amazing global learning community and amazing teachers that we get to call colleagues. So with me today, I have Alicia and Caitlin, both veteran teachers with Outschool. Alicia, will you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you to Outschool and what you teach on Outschool?
Sure. Hi, everybody. First, thank you for inviting me. My name is Alicia Comer-Wright, and I have been a user of the Outschool platform since 2016. I started as a parent as well. I'm a former educator of about 12 years, turned homeschooler of the last 7 years or so, and I run a homeschool cooperative here in Richmond, Virginia. On Outschool, however, I teach mostly history classes, a bunch of stories, African-American stories, in particular to elementary age students. I run some super fun Lego clubs. Those are probably as much fun for me as it is for the kids. And then I also run some middle school history classes based on the text by Howard Zinn.
All right, thank you, Alicia. How about you, Caitlin?
Sure. So my name's Caitlin Kaiser. I've been on Outschool as a teacher since August of 2019. I think I just passed my very first class ever taught. I saw it pop up in Facebook memories and was very excited about that. My background is in music. I'm like this close to having a doctorate in music. I'm hoping to actually finish it in the spring, hopefully. So I mostly teach music classes on Outschool, lots of like little kid music classes. In particular, the 5 to 10 age bracket seems to be, where I kind of have found the most success for live classes. And I also teach a lot of flex classes and really love those flex classes as well.
All right, well, you both come with a lot of experience, and I greatly appreciate you taking time out of your teaching schedule to share your insights with our teachers, again, whether they're new or they've been on the site for several years. So we have invited Alicia and Caitlin to join us today to answer some questions around our monthly themes. So starting in September, our class quality and our success team are launching monthly trainings around a theme, and this month is how to be successful on Outschool. And we're going to talk a little bit about planning and preparation, instructional design, classroom management, and how they view professionalism here on the platform. So with that, my first question is, Caitlin and Alicia, when you think of planning and preparation for your classes, how do you approach each planning and preparation? Alicia, would you mind starting, and then we'll go Caitlin?
Sure. You know, I plan very similar to the same way I did when I was a brick and mortar teacher. I sit down, I have an idea, and I think, oh, I bet kids would really like this. And I try to sit and just sort of flush it out. What would it look like, and what would it look like if I was, and I try to plan it from, if I was a student in this classroom, what would I like to do? What would be fun for me? I tend to tell a lot of stories. And so I try to stay away from some of the more popular stories that everyone knows. I try to find niche stories about brave African Americans that people don't really know about, and try to find a way to make those come alive. Teaching online is very different from teaching in person, which is what I've been doing the last 7 years in a cooperative in-person standpoint. It does require sort of a different set of skills. In person, I'm able to, you know, use body proximity. I'm able to visually see and interact and use a lot of, you know, body language and social cues that don't always translate online. And so then I'm constantly looking for little things that sort of tell me if a student's getting frustrated or if I need to change directions or pivot. And so when I'm planning, I really try to give myself a lot of space and not plan things that I know that I need to stick firm to, because, you know, we're living in some very challenging times, and I try to be able to be flexible and adapt to whatever it is I'm trying to teach, to make sure the students are able to understand the concepts.
And Alicia, you hit on a really good phrase there and term with flexibility. And yes, being in a brick and mortar versus on an online platform, you do have to have a lot of flexibility. Caitlin and I, before we started this broadcast, we talked about flexibility being a key attribute of a successful Outschool teacher. And Alicia, you didn't hear that, so I love that she had that Caitlin had told me prior to that, and then you are also, when you weren't part of that conversation, you're also talking about flexibility. So really good point that you do have to be flexible. Caitlin, how about you for planning and preparation? What do you do? How do you approach it?
Sure.
Both of those.
Yeah, so, you know, I have a performance background. All of my degrees are in flute performance, and I think having the performance background has allowed me to look at things probably a little differently than if I was coming to this more from like a brick and mortar teacher standpoint. I definitely work a lot more on the fly, I think, than people who have been in kind of that traditional schooling environment where, you know, you have to submit your lesson plans and everything in advance. So I still draft up lesson plans. I love creating materials for my students, especially. So that's something I tend to kind of start with. But like Alicia said, it's like I start with a wild idea, and from there I kind of map out like, how can I make this the best experience for the kids? I think about things like, you know, if it's a group of 3-year-olds, I'm not going to make them sit there listening to me lecture for 50 minutes. And so kind of breaking it up and just really allowing them to engage in lots of different ways, and also just keeping in mind at all times like who I'm talking to, and the fact that we're on a computer versus being in person. You know, it's so different, like you're this tall on a computer screen, or if you're on an iPad screen or something. So thinking about those things and how to engage kind of beyond just lecturing at them, and how to kind of draw them into class as well.
Very good. And that engaging comment too, that leads me to another question I have for you. But real quick, before we get there about how to engage and how to make your classes interactive, what do you believe you need, as a successful Outschool teacher, what do you need to consider differently in regards to Outschool's policies? How do you use the support.outschool.com, the articles there, and how do you use those to help shape your classes with our content policies and things like that? Alicia, you want to go?
Okay.
So you take a breath. Or Caitlin, either one of you.
Probably one of the more challenging questions, honestly. When I was reading this, I thought, well, which policy are we speaking to? I'm not quite sure. I will say that, sometimes Outschool does have the policy of the child only being on the screen. And so that one is probably difficult when you're working with younger children sometimes to, you have a natural tendency to want a parent to be able to support the child, but at the same time honor and understanding the security reasons very well why. And so a lot of times I'll see hands into the to the picture, I'll see an elbow or something. But with regards to some of the content policy, because I tell a lot of stories, and I am not a digital illustrator, I may use books, and so I have personally reached out to authors and publishing companies to get rights and access to do that. And you won't always get access. Sometimes you'll have a really great story I want to tell and I want to use, but the company says no, and so then I have to find something else. Sometimes I have to come up with my own images, and just things like being able to find music that I can use that's for free in the background when I'm doing my Lego club, instead of, the kids who all want to hear the Star Wars soundtrack,
Mm-hmm.
So just being really careful and, respectful of the work other people have created and making sure they receive credit and that I don't use them. So that's probably one of the more difficult ones in the addition of when working with young children, trying to find that balance of parental support and camera.
Very good. So you hit on two of our policies about the student is the enrolled student is the only
Yes.
person that should be on in the camera. So that is a really important one that Outschool does have for our learner safety. And that's why we have our learners, even if they do want their cameras off, that we as teachers need to have that visual check-in to make sure that it is our student on the other side. So that was a really good point. And I love that you talked about the copyright and unique, making sure you have permission. So that's always a hot topic. So thank you, Alicia, for giving us those examples of how you have reached out to publishers and authors. And then if you can't use it, you keep searching.
Yeah,
so thank you for that insight and those examples. Caitlin, how about you?
I actually had pretty similar thoughts when looking at the question, especially since I teach music classes. Of course, a huge part of teaching music appreciation and music literature is listening to music. So there's been a lot of interesting kind of workarounds that I've had to come up with and also just consider. Like Alicia, lots of conversations between me and like orchestras in particular, like available on YouTube, like can I show the Berlin Philharmonic's version of this if I show a minute of it, like those types of things. And I've also just had to kind of like suck it up and create a lot of my own content and create a lot of my own materials. Especially I teach a lot of little kids and I love to give little kids things to keep their hands busy while they're in class, especially if they're listening, right? They're not going to sit and listen to you talk for 30 minutes probably. So I give lots of worksheets and coloring sheets, and just being able to like spend the time and invest the time into creating those materials has been a huge thing, but something that I'm very glad to have spent the time doing. And I think it's really worth it. And like Alicia said, it's like at the end of the day, you have to think, if it was, if I created that book, would I want somebody to just share it on the internet for free? Like probably not, so just really kind of thinking through those things, I think, is definitely one of the harder policies that Outschool has that we have to think about as teachers.
And I know, Caitlin, I've seen some of your material that you've come up with, and Alicia, I've already told you you're going to get my girls here later this fall. Caitlin, I always wish that my girls were a little younger for your coloring with the master's classes because of all the work that you've put into that class. Caitlin, I'll start with you here. You hit on engaging and interactive with your students, how to make it. So you provide materials. What else do you do either when you're planning or when you're teaching? What do you do to make sure that students are all interacting and engaged? And how do you check for that engagement with your students in an online virtual setting?
Sure. So one big thing that I do, especially with my teenagers, is just keep in mind that sometimes kids are going to be having a bad day and they're not going to want to interact, and that it's completely okay at the end of the day. It's different, I think, if you're kind of in a live environment and you're able to like pull them in more and like focus their attention on you. But especially I deal with a lot of like I said, little kids. And sometimes 4-year-olds are just running all over the place while I'm teaching my, class, whatever it is. And it's okay because they're still absorbing the information. So I think a huge part of engagement is realizing that sometimes it's not going to work, and it's okay. And they can still be having a good class interaction and a good class experience without necessarily showing you the visual signs that they're like sitting there engaging with you. Other things that I do, especially again with my little ones and with my teenagers too, is offer up discussion questions, open-ended questions. I think it really allows the kids to feel like you're listening to what they're saying. And I know, especially with my little ones, they love to be able to tell me things. And sometimes those things are not related to our class at all. I've had a lot of like 4-year-olds who bring like their pet chicken to class, and they're showing off their chicken at the beginning of class while they're supposed to be introducing themselves. And so that kind of goes back to the flexibility thing is, realizing that it's important to our students to get to talk to another person and to feel like they're being heard. And sometimes that means that our lesson plan gets deviated for a moment while they show us their pet chicken or what have you. I don't use tons and tons of things like Kahoot and, Flipgrid and those types of things, and prefer instead to kind of get rid of the technology aspect sometimes and just chat with my students.
Yes, sometimes the technology can be a little overwhelming, not just for the teacher. Remember, non-tech person, now I'm teaching online. And so, if it's overwhelming for you, it can also be overwhelming for your students. So Caitlin, I really like how you take the tech out, even though we are using tech to teach our classes. Alicia, how about you? What do you do? How do you strive to create your lessons to be interactive and engaging with your students?
I would say that one of the things that I pride myself in is that I make sure I call on each and every single child in my class. My goal is to call on each one twice, just depending on how large the class is. That may or may not happen, but I also accept people to volunteer and raise their hand. But I have a little checklist, and I'm literally trying to make sure that I at least touch base with each child so that they all feel as though they participated. And because I'm really genuinely interested in hearing what they have to say. A lot of my stories are presented kind of in first person dramatic, like a performance almost. So the interaction is more so me stopping at certain points of the story while I'm reenacting as I'm this person and calling and asking them and bringing in additional details from the outside. Caitlin, I was super excited to hear you were a flutist. I play the flute as well.
Very cool.
So I understand the performer part. And then in my history classes, I also am not a big tech user, although believe it or not, I was one of the first cohorts to receive an additional degree in educational technology, but I feel like that was so long ago. The technology I learned is no longer near, and I just have not dedicated myself to mastering these other tools. But in my middle school classes, when we're talking about history, and we're particularly talking about difficult history from the lens of various marginalized groups, I feel like just me and the student sort of conversing back and forth is more powerful than any additional game I can put out there, and just asking them, questions about, well, why do you think this happened? Or what would have happened if this had happened? Or just really trying to get kids to sort of dig deeper in history and imagine even what alternate universes could have been had we explored, there are definitely significant points in history where if one decision had been made differently, we could have a completely different outcome. And try to get them to imagine and make connections. So that's where my engagement happens in my older classes. In my Lego club classes, that's full of engagement because the kids are building and they're creating, and I'm giving feedback, and I love it. So that one just naturally has a lot of fun and high energy in it.
Yeah, I understand. I teach a lot of cooking and baking classes, and then a lot of history too. And so it's a lot of discussion and a lot of just checking in. So I know one of the questions was about how not to use technology. And I think both of you have hit on it, is that conversations, open-ended discussion and dialogue versus a yes or no. And those are good examples of great teaching, being able to dive deeper and have the students think critically. So thank you both for that. And so let's talk about classroom management. So, this is different. You can't just walk around the room. You can't put, Erin away from Alicia. I mean, you can turn the chat off so Erin and Alicia are not passing notes in class. You know, and you could practice that teacher look, like looking at your camera, and then they all think you're looking at them. Yeah, like that, Alicia. So, what would be one or two tips that you can share that you use in your classroom when you're teaching your classes? Caitlin, would you lead us on this one?
Sure. So when I start all of my classes, we review class rules, even if it's a class that's been going on, like my ongoing sections that have been going on forever and ever. We still review the class rules. And, you know, I think it's important to set expectations, especially with little ones. When I'm dealing with 5-year-olds, you know, they don't always know how to handle the online thing. But I think it's also important to keep in mind who your audience is. I think expectations in public school are very different than expectations of students who have been homeschooling or unschooling their entire lives, and they're used to being able to, you know, freely discuss their opinions with people and that type of thing. So I think setting expectations is really important, but just mindfully setting those expectations. I'm also not a teacher. I'm never a serious teacher, honestly. And I'm not somebody who's ever going to like do the teacher face at my students if they're doing something, or, you know, call somebody out and tell them that they need to stop doing it. I'm more of a like behind the scenes. If somebody keeps unmuting themselves, I'm going to make it so nobody can unmute themselves and ask everybody to put their hand up. If somebody is saying something I don't like in the chat box, if they're teenagers, I'm going to remind them that they can't use the chat box that way. And if they're younger than that, I'm going to set it to only come to me. So I think knowing how you can manage your classroom within Zoom is really, really important, something to check out. And then beyond that, just, you know, giving your students some expectations so they kind of know like what your classroom's about and what you kind of expect from them. I think that kind of goes a long way with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say it's very similar to the same thing. Remembering that, you know, different, you know, what's developmentally appropriate for students, and understanding that it's okay. They're, you know, 3, 5, 6, 8 even. I tend to do a lot of modeling, and also calling their attention without letting people realize I'm calling to attention. So if someone is sharing and someone's blurting out or wants to blurt out, I may say, "Oh, Jacob, did you have a question for Natalie? Because she's sharing right now." You know, so that automatically makes them think, wait, and what I have to say related to what Natalie's sharing, or is it something I want to share, and maybe I'll wait my turn. And if it's a question, that's even great, because Natalie's like, oh, someone actually has a question, or, you know, is really thinking about what I have to say. And so a lot of times kids will sort of self-correct. They'll say, no, I wanted to share, but I'll wait to the end. And then that sort of like reinforces that, that idea of just sort of waiting your turn. You know, I have had to use the mute button sometimes. I usually let kids know I'm going to put the mute on, and then, you know, you will get kids who will unmute themselves and kind of go back and forth. And sometimes I'll send a little chat and just say, you know, we need to be respectful of all of our friends, or just make a note, we need to be respectful of all of our friends. So I really don't like muting students, but, you know, sometimes it does become necessary when it starts to take away from other people's opportunity to experience and enjoy the class.
Very good. I think clear expectations, and especially because we do have students coming from not just maybe homeschooling, unschooling, as Caitlin mentioned, brick and mortar, but we're also a global learning community. And so making sure that you are clear so that people understand where you're coming from and how you want your students to, you know, behave, what to expect. So good point. And because we do have those different learning backgrounds, and especially as Outschool grows, we get students from different cultures, and making sure that we are reaching all of them. So question on, what about professionalism? How do you grow as a professional, and what do you see as being professional with Outschool? I mean, it's not just when you're in your classroom, but how does being an Outschool teacher kind of affect you in a professional way? Go for it, Alicia.
I feel like, you know, as you build more classes and you begin to create a following of students, and the beautiful thing is that a lot of times if students enjoy your classes, they'll sign up for more. I mean, I have 4 children, and they're taking classes all over the place as well. And they have their favorite teachers, and whenever someone has a new release, we go sign up. And so you know, customer service plays a huge part in that, trying to respond to emails. And I can tell the emails can become a bit overwhelming as a teacher. It's a lot, but trying to follow up within 24 hours. And if you're a little bit later, 48 hours, apologizing, you know, and explaining and following up. I found that to be a big one. Putting notes in the classroom to explain different things or any changes that's going to happen. And constantly for myself, trying to find ways to improve. I attend a lot of webinars through various historical societies, and I'm constantly reading new books and checking out new picture books and contacting illustrators and publishers to see what I can find and what I can use and how I can improve upon the stories that I tell, what additional information I can add. And I think all of that leads to a better experience. I will say a lot of times, the first time you teach something is not as great as the 10th time you teach it, because you've had time to build in. I almost want to give a discount to that very first class, because I'm thinking you're probably not going to get, you know, the experience that I will have gained by teaching it a few times, but it's still a high quality class, and I appreciate everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So completely agree with everything that Alicia just said there. I think, you know, it's so easy for us as teachers to get kind of caught up in the reviews or to get our feelings hurt. And of course, our feelings are going to get hurt if someone says that you didn't do, you know, a perfect job, because we're teachers and we care about what we're doing. But I think after, you know, a day or two, when you start to maybe feel less sad about getting a 3-star or whatever, going back and actually looking at like what the parent told you is really important. Like remembering that we're also running a business and that our business is, you know, working for these parents basically and helping them teach their students. So keeping in mind what the parents want is hugely important. And also as far as professionalism and like how professionalism as an Outschool teacher has changed me and my perspective, one huge thing that it's done for sure is I'm always mindful of what I put on social media, because I know that parents can Google search me and find me all over social media. Like I have a YouTube channel. I never put anything on the YouTube channel that I wouldn't want a parent to see. And the same, especially in like the Outschool Teacher Hub Facebook page, like remembering that a lot of teachers are also parents. And so don't say anything that you might not want a parent to see. So those types of things I think are also just really important, in addition to, you know, personal development and attending webinars like Alicia said.
Very good. I agree. It's in, there's so much more accessible for parents to find out. So keeping yourself professional, you know, within your classroom, keep professional by keep on learning, and also in this digital world, being professional. We're almost out of time here, but what I would like to know is especially for our newer teachers, what would be 2 or 3 things that have gotten you to be successful, or that you wish you had known if you were talking to yourself 2 years ago or 3 years ago when you started as teacher? What are those 2 or 3 tips that you think you could share and leave with all of our teachers, whether they're rookies or veterans?
I would say figure out what you love. If you're starting out, figure out what your talents are and what you have a strong knowledge base in. You know, I would not suggest Outschool being the platform for you to try something completely that you don't really have a background in. I'll say that, you know, a lot of us are homeschoolers, and so we are informal educators, so we spot things pretty quickly. And I can usually tell if someone really has a steep background in something or not. And so try to find something that, one, you really know, that you really love, that excites you. And I think it'll come across, and it'll come across to the kids so that they are energetic to take it too, because they can coming from you. And the parents are feeling like they're getting a great quality class. And then the other thing I was going to say was, there was one other thing, but I can't remember. So I guess maybe that's the big one, right? Do what you love and what you're good at.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Alicia. Caitlin, how about you?
Well, obviously that's a great answer, and it was definitely on my list as well. But the other one that was on my list was just to laugh at yourself and realize that sometimes you're not going to be perfect, and it's totally okay. I think kids especially appreciate like people being human, and sometimes we make mistakes and sometimes we say things incorrectly. And like I've had students call me out when I like misspeak or whatever in class, and it's not that they're being rude, so don't look at them as though they're, you know, trying to like put you down or something. It's just that they're kids and they're curious and they're inquisitive and they want to participate in the conversation. So I think just learning how to laugh it off when you do something that's funny or when you make a mistake is just important for life in general, but especially as a teacher.
Well, you both have just an immense amount of knowledge, and we are already out of time. So I want to thank you both, Alicia and Caitlin, for joining me here and talking with our teachers here on the Outschool platform. So again, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise on how to be a successful Outschool teacher. And everyone that is watching now or watching later, please know that there are lots of training available for you. Please visit pd.outschool.com and sign up for our monthly webinars or our trainings that we have every week. You can also sign up for one-on-one coaching from one of our class quality specialists. If you're part of the social media groups, LaTanya does our weekly Facebook Lives where you can also get questions answered. So again, everyone, on behalf of Outschool, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to finding your classes for my girls and seeing how you are succeeding on Outschool. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Bye.